I'm a little sick, but it feels good to be back in the studio and back on a, regular schedule. You can probably hear a little bit of the sickness in my voice. Don't know why I'm sick. I have one weird theory, which is we were in LA right at the height of the fires, and we drove all around LA, and honestly, we didn't see any fires, but the final day we were there, we could smell a charriness in the air. Like, you could smell the smokiness in the air. You couldn't really see it. I mean, maybe there was like a slight mist, but, it looks just like fog would look, for example. But, yeah, you could definitely smell it. And I have a theory that I either have like a little bit of a cold from traveling and everything, or it actually is just the remnants of breathing in that like really terrible air for a while. We actually got, a warning on our phones when we were in LA that said like air quality is hazardous for people with, certain issues. Like if you have asthma or if you have some other type of breathing issue, it's recommended you don't go outside in that. So I'm thinking maybe it's that. It could just be a standard cold, but I'm thinking maybe it's whatever, the impact of the terrible air quality. But anyway, so there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about today. First, let's do a breakdown of what everything was like. So obviously we were in Tennessee and Nashville for Politicon, and then Corin and I went to LA, and we were on the Joe Rogan Experience. So first, let's go to Politicon, and let's go through. I like how I have my picture of myself over my left shoulder. That is like, I'm realizing now how incredibly narcissistic that looks. But it's too late to change it, so it is what it is. It's me and me. So first, Politicon. Let's see if I can even remember all the panels that I was on. First, let's talk about Trump versus Bernie. I had so much fun doing it. The guys are awesome. And, took pictures with them, and they had requested that I be their moderator, and I gladly accepted. That was actually the thing that made me the most nervous all week, was Trump versus Bernie. And the reason is, for that, I had to be on a script. And I've never been on a script before. I'm not an actor. I'm not comfortable on a script. I don't like being on a script. And so I didn't know how to deal with it. And the area where I feel like I struggled in the Trump versus Bernie debate where I was moderating was my timing. Because they had told me beforehand, hey man, don't hesitate to like get in between us and say, hey guys, calm down if we're at each other's throats. And so I did not hesitate to interject. I did not hesitate to basically shout them down. But they also said, well, if we're in the middle of a bit, let us finish the bit. Here's the problem. They're so good at what they do, I didn't know what was a bit and what was them just shooting from the hip. Because they're so funny, and, they can ad-lib just as good as if they were doing a bit. So I was clueless as to when to interject, when to go to the next question. We had a sheet that kind of walked us through, hey, here's what the first question is going to be, the second question, the third question, so on and so forth. And they said, hey, you might miss some, it's okay. At the end, just skip to the end. But again, I didn't know how much time was necessary for each thing for them to answer, so it was a little bit scattershot, and I was a little bit of a mess. So I don't think I did a great job moderating the debate because my timing was off, because, again, I couldn't tell the difference between a bit or them ad-libbing, because they're really funny either way. But after the debate, they told me, nah, man, you did a fine job, you did a good job, and it went really well. So I want to thank them for that. Again, I apologize if my timing was off, because I felt like it was off, because I didn't know, I've never done anything like that before. So hopefully I didn't interject too much and I didn't ruin that event too much. Now, the other panels, we had the one with Tommy Lauren, Tim Black, and Lauren Chen. That was an awesome panel. Massive shout out to Tim Black, who held down the left position with me. Tim Black is awesome in that format, man. Tim Black is a natural in front of a crowd. He knows how to deliver his lines. He knows where to put the inflection in his voice and things of that nature. So massive shout out to Tim Black. Great job there, man. And him and I wound up, without even trying, it just kind of happened, doing a number on Tommy Lauren. I almost felt bad for her at a certain point because he was knocking her over the head with the Colin Kaepernick stuff and police brutality, and then I came in and also landed a line on, hey, I agree with you on free speech, and that's exactly why I'm on Colin Kaepernick's side and why I think he should still be in the NFL. He's certainly good enough to still be in the NFL, and he's being punished for his free speech, for his right to protest. So that panel was really, really good. Now, the James Carville one, oh my goodness. Talk to Corin after that panel. It's the What Now Democrats panel. And after that panel, you couldn't talk to me for 2 hours. You could ask Corin. I was furious. I was beyond furious. I was steaming mad. Because not only was it like 5 versus 1, because the moderator was also against me, because I'm fine with that. You can have it 5 versus 1. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But the thing that got me a little mad is it wasn't like I was given a chance to respond every time somebody said something against one of my points or against my philosophy. It was like you'd have them start to pile on my ideology and the philosophy that I represent, and then it would just go to somebody else to do the exact same thing. And that got me upset. I was upset with that. And in the moment, I felt like I totally bombed the panel because I didn't get enough time to speak. I got 1/10 the time I needed to adequately rebut all of the stuff they were saying. But then looking at the panel after the fact, because Corin was trying to reassure me, like, nah, man, it was like you did a better job than you think you did. And everybody's going to be with you. And so then after the fact, watching it, I realized, my original perception wasn't exactly correct. That, yes, I did as good as I possibly could jousting with 5 people who disagree with me when even the time limits were lopsided against me. So looking back on it, I'm not as upset as I was in the moment. In the moment, I was just like, don't talk, like nobody talked to me. I'm really pissed. This was super annoying. I was dogpiled and I wasn't given an adequate chance to respond, and I think I did a bad job. No, I really didn't do a bad job. I actually did a pretty good job looking back on it, but it just felt like I didn't, particularly because my time was so constrained, so I didn't feel like I had enough time to adequately respond to everything. Now, I believe that's all the panels, right? Did I go through all the panels with you guys? I think so. If I'm missing one, I apologize. I really did a lot of events at this thing. Then comes the debate, the Charlie Kirk debate. Now, I think I wrecked him. I mean, I do. I think I absolutely wrecked him. What's fascinating is the response afterwards. There were plenty of people who said, oh my God, you destroyed him. For example, I got a text from TJ Kirk, the Amazing Atheist. I'm not sure if he wanted me to say that. I also got a text from my buddy who's relatively apolitical, I've been friends with since before high school. And, he watched the debate. I didn't even tell him I was debating Charlie Kirk, so it's funny that he found it right away. I guess I told him I was going to Politicon. But he found it online, and when he texted me afterwards and gave me like a paragraph as to, hey man, you did really well, and here's what I liked about it. I was kind of verified in my opinion that I did destroy him. But what's interesting is some of the response online was even people who agree with me were really concerned about the fact that he kept talking and he went on. I mean, if you really break it down in terms of how much time each of us got, I genuinely think Charlie Kirk got 65% of the time. Like, he spoke for the overwhelming majority of the time. Now, here's the thing, guys. I know that. When I was on stage, it was obvious that that's what was happening. And I was fine with it. And the reason is, I felt like he was meandering. He was going all over the place. His points were not coherent. He honestly sounded like a Republican talking points machine. There wasn't anything remotely interesting about what he was saying because it was all stuff you could see on Fox News at any night at 9 o'clock. Turn on Hannity and you'll get those same talking points. So, watching that in real time, my natural reaction, because you have to be able to shift gears in a debate easily, my natural reaction was like, oh, okay, so give him enough rope and he's going to hang himself. And that's what happened. He would just go on and on and on, and then there was one moment during the debate, and I swear to God, I didn't plan this, but he had been droning on, and I was like, oh, it was so boring, and what he was saying was so stale, that I literally went like this and pretended to sleep. And again, I wasn't planning on doing that. It just kind of happened. It just kind of came out because that was my genuine reaction in the moment. So as my buddy texted me, my friend Brian, he was like, he was just doing his pre-planned speech and like kind of going through his checklist. And I was responding like a human being. And the moment that I really got him and got him good is when I was not hesitating to say, like, yeah, man, you want to talk about problems with the Democrats and corruption with the Democrats and Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation and all that stuff? Totally agree. Joe Biden? Totally agree. Corrupt as can be. But it's weird. I'm willing to admit that, and you're unwilling to admit Trump has done anything wrong. You're unwilling to admit that, the Ukraine phone call was to get dirt on Joe Biden. You're unwilling to admit the corruption of the $300,000 through his hotel in D.C. from Saudi Arabia. So it's that moment where, if you're watching that debate and you're a casual outside observer, like let's say you're relatively apolitical. Let's say it was a presidential debate and you're relatively apolitical and you're watching it. You're going to go, oh, that guy's responding like a human being and that guy's a robot on his talking points. And so, when I watched it, and by the way, there's a best of that was just released on the Secular Talk YouTube channel last night. Definitely check that out. And you'll see, it's my interpretation of it really bears out because you have him going all over the place and then I will interject with one example or one counterpoint or one punchy line. And then all of a sudden, everything he just built up for the past 3.5 minutes is in tatters and he has to start from square one. So everybody check that out. There were at least 3 or 4 moments that I really loved. Probably the best one being him, like, condescendingly saying, like, what do you want the president to divest from? All of his assets? Absolutely, of course. That's the way it has to work with emoluments, especially if you are, technically it's legal to profit from a business as, when you're president. But it's definitely not legal to take any money from foreign governments. And Trump has been doing that. That's a fact. Trump and his team have been doing that. That's a fact. I mean, the Bank of China is, one of the people at one of his properties. You can't be profiting from the Bank of China as your president. You can't take money from Saudi Arabia through your hotel in D.C. Like, the answer is obviously yes, you have to divest from those assets, but he was saying it as if it was a gotcha to me. Like, oh, you want him to just divest from all of his assets? And of course I screamed, yes, absolutely, yes. And the crowd blew up. And that was one of, the biggest moments of the debate where I think the biggest punch was landed. So, that was my perception of the Charlie Kirk debate. I think the people who think that, he did a good job are just caught on the fact that he spoke for the majority of the time. But that's not a good indicator of who won the debate or who made the best points. That's just an indicator of, as some people called it, gish galloping. He just throws 1,000 things out there and hopes that it overwhelms people into thinking that he's making good points when really he's a robot on his partisan, hacky Republican talking points list. Now, just to respond real quick, because, the debate started with Trump's tax cuts. And, oh my God, is it good, is it bad? Every argument he used in that part of the debate was beyond ridiculous. Like, he was bringing up the average amount of money that went to your average middle-class family. And my response to that was, yeah, Jeff Bezos and I have an average net worth of $50 billion. So the point that that's supposed to make, and the audience got it because there was a big reaction when I said it, the point that that's supposed to make is you're using the most ridiculous metric to determine whether or not this was a tax cut that really helped average people. Because the reality is, again, I'm blown away by some of these facts to this day. According to the Tax Policy Center, under that tax bill, your run-of-the-mill poor person got a tax cut of $40. The mega rich, the top 0.01%, they got $937,700. Okay? 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Again, that's according to the Tax Policy Center. The Economic Policy Institute, he was talking about wages. Everything he said was wrong about that. The Economic Policy Institute recently released the numbers, and the growth target for nominal wages to keep up with inflation is 3.5% to 4%. What's the actual wage growth? It is 3.2%. So in other words, wages are not keeping up with inflation. That's not true. Wages are stagnant, and they've been stagnant since the 1980s. And then we haven't even gotten into, the anti-Obamacare provision in his tax bill, which made it so that 7 million Americans lost their insurance. And when the full impact of the tax bill takes effect, it will be 13 million Americans that are going to lose their insurance, their health insurance, because of that tax bill. And this is according to Gallup data. And the bill polls at 33%. It polls at 33%. So if he wants to defend that, by all means, he can go right ahead. That's the other moment that people really liked, is when I told him what the effective tax rate is. The effective tax rate is about 12% for corporations. And his response was, well, it should be 0. I was like, okay, that's a very unpopular position. Please proceed. That's another moment that people liked in the debate. But bottom line is, he was all over the place. He was meandering. He was a talking point machine. And I would just interject every now and then and punch giant gaping holes in his arguments. And so I think that the debate went really well. Definitely check out the best of that debate if you haven't yet. It should be one of the recent videos on the Secular Talk YouTube channel. Okay, now finally, let's talk a little bit about Joe Rogan. So there's a couple things that people are talking about post this podcast, and one of them is about Rave Dubin. So there were 2 cuts in the podcast. There were 2 cuts where you see Joe Rogan bring up classical liberalism, and it looks like he's about to, say more on the subject, and then boom, it cuts off and it kind of hops forward, and he's talking about still classical liberalism, but not about any particular individual by the name of Rave Dubin. Unfortunately, I have to tell everybody, the conspiracy theory is not true. He was not talking about Rave Dubin in the cuts there. I don't know how much of this he wants me to give away because he cut it out for a reason, but I will say he just made an analogy that could have easily been misconstrued when talking about classical liberalism. He said, saying you're a classical liberal is like saying you're this and this, and the this and this that he said, again, I'm not saying it because Joe cut it out for a reason, but it was something where people could have said to him, hey man, are you saying all classical liberals are this and this? When no, the point wasn't classical liberals are like this. The point was it's an analogy about putting a spin on a label. You understand? So he didn't want people to think he was saying all classical liberals are X. So he pulled it out just to take out any of the, just to kill any of the misperceptions or misconstruing of his words up front. It's not a common thing for Joe to cut stuff out, but at the same time, somebody sitting in the room, because I actually told him right when he said the thing that he said that he wanted cut out, I actually said to him, dude, people are going to misconstrue that. And he was like, yeah, you're right, maybe we'll cut that out. So, but unfortunately, it wasn't about Rave Dubin. There was nothing about Rave Dubin that was said on air. Not a word about Rave Dubin was said on air. So anyway, that's the first thing that I wanted to respond to. The second thing I wanted to respond to was the idea that people were saying I was high as balls, that I was on Adderall. Unfortunately, I have to tell everybody that's not true either. Before doing the podcast, I had caffeine. And then during the podcast, about, maybe half of the way through or something like that, Rogan asked me if I wanted turmeric coffee. To which I responded, sure, I'll have some, because when in Rome, why not? I'm on the Joe Rogan podcast. He could have offered me elk meat. He could have offered me DMT, and I'd be like, let's do it, dog. So I had caffeine before going in and then caffeine while on air, and I was fucking bouncing off the walls. And I said when the podcast ended, Joe, we could have gone for 5 hours. I meant it. We could have talked for 5 hours easy peasy. So I hate to burst everybody's bubble on that one, too. I will say, I have no objection to taking Adderall. Like, would I have taken Adderall? If somebody offered me Adderall before I did the Joe Rogan podcast, would I have taken it? Hell yeah, I would have taken it. And I would have told you guys that I took it. Why not? But I wasn't on Adderall. And then also, listen, I enjoyed the podcast. It was a lot of fun. But what's interesting is, and this has happened a bunch now. So it's like you have the trolls who are waiting up front to dislike the video. And that's always what happens, especially when there's any lefty guest on, whether it's me or Abby Martin or Jimmy Dore or whoever it might be. It's like there are people who are the trolls and they just want to dislike up front. And so what you see is the first time I went to the video, I was like, oh, that's a shame. I wonder why, so many people disliked it, because the disparities may be 80% likes, 20% dislikes, and 20% is hefty for dislikes. And then what happens is, of course, you come back a day later, you come back 2 days later, and the dislikes get less and less and less and less. And there's a comment that I like, because somebody said this. They were like, yeah, the more I listen and the more I give him a chance to talk, the more I like him. And then, of course, there were examples of, people saying, and this is my favorite stuff to read, hey, I'm a conservative, but yeah, I think this guy's reasonable. I might not agree with him on this, and this, but, I like hearing his perspective. I like hearing his opinion, and I think he's honest. I love that. That means the world to me. And we did get a lot of those comments. And what I liked about the conversation is it was so wide-ranging. Joe and I hit so many issues. And so, yeah, everybody watch it if you haven't watched it yet. It's definitely a fascinating podcast. And I want to say thank you to Joe as well, because he said something that really made me smile. He called me his favorite online political commentator. And honestly, man, that means a lot. That means a lot, because I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan's podcast, and, I watch it. I don't watch every episode, but, I do watch the overwhelming majority of them, and it means a lot to hear him say that. That's a quite an endorsement, and yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get too mushy and emotional on people, but that was a big moment where it felt really good to hear that. So anyway, a big thank you to Joe Rogan. As he always says when we go there, let's do these more often. I told him, you got to get me on a plane. You got to force me on a plane, because I hate flying, man. I hate flying. But I'm sure there will be a bunch of these coming up in the future as well. So anyway, that's my breakdown. Politicon was fun in Nashville, Tennessee. Love Nashville, by the way. And in LA, the Joe Rogan experience was fun. Also, I did TYT's The Conversation with Cenk Uygur. Him and I sparred on Bernie versus Warren. You guys can check that out as well. But interesting travels. But I will say I'm happy to be back in the studio doing the normal show now.